On January 29, 1945, at approximately 2:47 in the afternoon in the Belgian village of Holtzheim, First Sergeant Leonard Funk encountered a situation that would become one of the most remarkable combat actions of World War II. As he rounded the corner of a farmhouse, he found himself facing 90 German soldiers. Roughly half of these men were already armed, while the others were in the process of retrieving rifles from a pile on the ground. 4 American GIs knelt in the snow with their hands positioned behind their heads in surrender. The situation had deteriorated dramatically in the preceding 20 minutes. These German soldiers had been prisoners of war, approximately 80 of them having been captured by Funk's company during the assault on the village. Due to severe manpower constraints, only 4 men could be spared to guard them. The prisoners had since been freed by a German patrol, and they were now armed and organizing to launch an attack against Company C from the rear position. A German officer stepped forward and forcefully pressed an MP-40 submachine gun against Funk's abdomen while shouting commands in German. Funk possessed no knowledge of the German language, nor did any of the other Americans present. The officer repeated his commands with increasing volume, his face reddening with frustration and anger. Funk assessed the situation before him, the 90 armed Germans, his 4 disarmed soldiers, and the weapon pressed against his body, and began to laugh. The German officer's expression transformed from confusion to rage as he continued to shout. Funk's laughter only intensified. What transpired in the following 60 seconds would result in 21 German casualties, the surrender of the remaining enemy soldiers, and ultimately earn Leonard Funk the Medal of Honor for one of the most audacious acts of combat in the entire war. The catalyst for this extraordinary sequence of events was his uncontrollable laughter. Leonard Alfred Funk, Jr. entered the world on August 27, 1916, in Braddock Township, Pennsylvania, a steel town characterized by smokestacks and foundries lining the Monongahela River, situated 8 miles east of Pittsburgh. Funk matured quickly and learned the weight of responsibility at an early age. By the time he completed his high school education in 1934, he had already spent years caring for his younger brother. The Great Depression was grinding through its 5th devastating year. Employment opportunities were extraordinarily scarce, and college attendance remained nothing more than an impossible fantasy for most working-class families. In June 1941, with warfare consuming Europe and Asia, Congress extended the military draft. When Funk's number was called, he reported to the induction center at Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. He was 24 years old, stood 5 feet 5 inches tall, and weighed 140 pounds. The Army physical examiner who evaluated him likely anticipated assigning him to clerical duties. This assessment proved entirely incorrect. Funk volunteered for the paratroopers. American airborne forces in 1941 were in their infancy. The concept of jumping from aircraft to land behind enemy lines and fight while surrounded struck most soldiers as a form of suicide. The volunteers for such duty represented a distinctly different breed of warrior. Airborne training was specifically designed to break candidates both physically and mentally. 5 weeks of relentless running, jumping, climbing, falling, and brutal physical conditioning eliminated approximately half of all candidates. Those who survived faced the jump towers, followed by actual aircraft jumps. The first moment a trainee stepped out of a C-47 aircraft at 1,200 feet, every instinct screamed to grasp the doorframe and refuse to release it. The ground appeared impossibly distant, the wind tore at exposed skin, and the parachute represented nothing more than fabric, cord, and faith in engineering. Funk successfully earned his jump wings and received assignment to Company C, 1st Battalion, 508th Paratrooper Infantry Regiment at Camp Blanding, Florida. The 508th deployed to England in late 1943, where they joined the 82nd Airborne Division, known as the All-Americans, veterans of combat operations in Sicily and Italy. These men had already experienced combat jumps, had killed enemy soldiers, and had witnessed friends die in battle. Funk arrived as the new recruit at 27 years old, considered ancient by paratrooper standards, where most squad members were barely 20 years old. Despite his newcomer status, Funk possessed qualities the younger men lacked: maturity, steadiness, and the kind of quiet competence that inspired men to follow leadership into the most dangerous situations. By the time of the D-Day invasion, he had advanced to squad leader. By the Holland campaign, he would be serving as acting company executive officer. First, however, he needed to survive Normandy. On June 6, 1944, at 1:30 in the morning, the C-47 Skytrain aircraft shuddered violently as German anti-aircraft fire exploded in proximity. Funk stood in the stick, the line of paratroopers awaiting their jump, with 60 pounds of equipment strapped to his body, including an M1A1 Thompson submachine gun, ammunition, grenades, rations, and medical supplies. The aircraft flew at 400 feet, dangerously below the minimum safe altitude for parachute deployment. The pilots could not gain altitude due to intense German anti-aircraft fire filling the sky. Tracer rounds arced through the darkness, and the paratroopers could hear metal fragments striking the aircraft fuselage. The Normandy invasion involved 13,000 paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. Their mission required landing behind the beaches to secure bridges and crossroads, preventing German reinforcements from reaching the coastal defenses. Nothing proceeded according to the carefully laid plans. When the green light illuminated, Funk jumped into the darkness. The propeller blast struck him with tremendous force before his parachute deployed, and the world became suddenly quiet. Below him lay occupied France, enemy territory extending in every direction. The D-Day airborne operation descended into chaos from the initial moments. German anti-aircraft fire had scattered the carefully organized formations across 50 miles of French countryside. Paratroopers were landing in flooded fields and drowning under the weight of their equipment. Others descended directly into German military camps and were killed before they could cut themselves free from their harnesses. Funk's landing was hard, resulting in a severely twisted ankle that was badly sprained or possibly fractured. The pain was immediate and intense, and every step would cause agony for the following 2 weeks. However, he retained the ability to walk and fight, which represented all that truly mattered. He gathered his parachute, buried it, and began moving through enemy territory. He found himself 40 miles from his designated drop zone, requiring him to traverse 40 miles of German-held territory in darkness and alone. Within hours, Funk had collected a group of lost paratroopers, men from different units, companies, and regiments. Eventually, 18 men gathered, all seeking leadership in the confusion. Funk provided the direction they desperately needed. For 10 days, Funk led this assembled group through German-held territory, traveling exclusively at night, hiding during daylight hours, and fighting when circumstances demanded combat. Despite his injured ankle, he insisted on serving as the lead scout, deliberately placing himself in the most dangerous position to protect his men. By the time of the Allied link-up on June 17th, every single man survived the ordeal without a single casualty. 10 days behind enemy lines, 40 miles of German-occupied France, and Leonard Funk brought every man home safely. His actions earned him the Silver Star, the third highest combat decoration, along with a Bronze Star for meritorious service and his first Purple Heart. Funk's war was only beginning. On September 17, 1944, Operation Market Garden commenced in Holland, representing the largest airborne assault in military history. 35,000 paratroopers dropped into the Netherlands to capture a series of bridges across the Rhine River. British, American, and Polish forces all participated in the simultaneous jump. If the operation succeeded, Allied forces would reach Germany by Christmas. Field Marshal Montgomery's plan was extraordinarily ambitious, perhaps excessively so. The paratroopers needed to capture and maintain control of 7 bridges across 64 miles of Dutch territory, while ground forces raced up a single highway to establish link-up. Everything depended on speed, surprise, and the absence of significant complications. Everything went wrong. The British 1st Airborne Division landed at Arnhem, the furthest bridge objective. They encountered SS Panzer divisions whose presence in the area was unexpected. For 9 days they fought desperately in the streets before only 2,000 of the original 10,000 men successfully escaped. The bridge too far entered military history as a cautionary tale of overambitious planning. Leonard Funk remained unaware of the larger strategic picture. He understood only his assigned mission: support the landings, secure the drop zones, and engage enemy forces. After the initial touchdown, his company secured their objective through standard tactical procedures. The 508th was operating near Nijmegen, assisting in the capture of bridges that would enable ground forces to advance. Funk then observed something that was not part of the operational plan. 3 German 20mm flak guns were firing at incoming Allied gliders. These gliders carried critical reinforcements, including personnel, jeeps, artillery pieces, ammunition, and medical supplies. If the anti-aircraft guns continued firing, hundreds of men would die before reaching the ground. The gun position was entrenched on elevated ground near Vauxhall, with approximately 20 German soldiers manning the weapons and providing security through sandbags, camouflage, and interlocking fields of fire. Funk had 3 men under his command. Standard military doctrine dictated a 3-to-1 advantage for assaulting a prepared defensive position. Funk faced the opposite situation. He was outnumbered 7-to-1. He ordered the attack anyway. Leading from the front, Funk and his 3-man patrol assaulted the German position. They eliminated the security detachment, stormed the gun emplacements, and neutralized all 3 weapons along with their crews. 20 Germans against 3 Americans, and the guns fell silent. The gliders landed safely. This action earned Funk the Distinguished Service Cross, the 2nd highest decoration for valor, positioned 1 step below the Medal of Honor. Now Funk possessed both a Silver Star and a Distinguished Service Cross, 2 of the rarest combat decorations in the American military. Most soldiers who earned even one of these decorations were considered heroes for life. Funk's combat service was far from complete. On December 16, 1944, the Germans launched their final desperate offensive. 3 armies comprising 400,000 men, 1,400 tanks, and 1,900 artillery pieces crashed through American lines in the Ardennes forest, aiming for the critical port of Antwerp. Hitler's plan appeared insane, yet nearly succeeded. He gambled everything on one massive attack intended to split the Allied armies, capture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace in the West, allowing Germany to concentrate forces against the Soviets in the East. For American forces, the offensive represented a nightmare scenario. The attack struck thinly held sectors manned by inexperienced troops and exhausted veterans who had been pulled off the front lines to rest. Entire divisions crumbled under the assault. Thousands of soldiers surrendered. The German advance created a bulge 50 miles deep in the Allied lines, giving the engagement its name, the Battle of the Bulge, which would become the largest battle the American Army fought in World War II, resulting in 89,000 American casualties before its conclusion. The weather conditions were brutal beyond description. Snow, ice, and temperatures plummeting to 5 degrees below zero created conditions where men froze to death in their foxholes. Weapons jammed from the cold, vehicles refused to start, and the freezing temperatures proved as deadly as enemy action. Then came the atrocity at Malmedy. On December 17, 1944, one day into the offensive, a convoy from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion was moving near the Bognay Crossroads when they encountered the spearhead of Kampfgruppe Piper, an SS armored battle group. The Americans were rear echelon troops, artillery observers, and radio operators, not equipped for combat against tanks and armored infantry. After a brief engagement, 113 Americans surrendered. They were herded into a farmer's field near the crossroads with their hands raised, disarmed, and prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. Then, the SS troops opened fire with machine guns, pistols, and rifles, shooting the prisoners down systematically. Men who attempted to escape were cut down by gunfire. Men who fell wounded were executed with shots to the head. 84 Americans died in that field. Some survived by feigning death, lying in the snow for hours as German boots walked past them and German voices laughed nearby. When darkness finally came, 43 survivors crawled away and made it back to American lines. The news spread through the American army with shocking speed. Within hours, every unit knew that Germans were executing prisoners. Normandy fundamentally changed the nature of the war. Before this massacre, the European conflict had maintained certain rules, unofficial and unspoken, but real nonetheless. Soldiers surrendered when situations became hopeless. Prisoners received treatment according to the Geneva Convention. A kind of grim professionalism existed between enemies. After Normandy, these rules ceased to exist. American soldiers swore they would never surrender to SS troops. Some units passed down orders prohibiting the taking of SS prisoners. When Funk heard about the massacre, something hardened permanently inside him. He had already witnessed too much death. Normandy, Holland, friends dying in fields and forests across Europe. This was different. This represented cold-blooded murder of men who had surrendered in good faith. Leonard Funk made a decision that would prove crucial in the coming days. He would never surrender to German forces under any circumstances. No matter what situation he faced, surrender was not an option. That decision would matter very soon. On January 29, 1945, in the Ardennes region, the German offensive had been broken and Allied forces were pushing back. Company C of the 508th Parachute Infantry received orders to capture the Belgian village of Holtzheim. A significant problem existed. Company C was severely under strength. The executive officer, the second in command, had been killed in action. They lacked sufficient personnel for the assault. Funk, now serving as acting executive officer, examined his depleted roster and made a decision. He proceeded to the company headquarters tent, where clerks, supply personnel, and cooks, men who normally never experienced direct combat, were working. Funk informed them they were all infantry now, and instructed them to grab their weapons because they were taking the village. He formed a makeshift platoon of 30 men who had spent most of the war behind desks. They had completed basic training, certainly, but real combat experience was absent for most. Many had never fired a shot at another human being. Funk did not concern himself with their inexperience. He needed bodies and would transform them into soldiers. The march to Holtzheim covered 15 miles through waist-deep snow during a driving blizzard. Temperatures remained well below freezing while German artillery shells exploded around the column in harassing fire from the flanks. Funk led from the front position. Upon reaching Holtzheim, Funk organized the assault. His clerks, his improvised warriors, followed him into the village. The village contained 15 houses with German soldiers in every one. Despite facing machine guns, rifles, and grenades, Funk and his men cleared every building. 30 prisoners were captured without a single American casualty. Another unit captured 50 additional Germans on the opposite side of town, bringing the total to 80 prisoners. The prisoners were corralled in the yard of a farmhouse. Funk surveyed his exhausted men who had been marching and fighting for hours. Scattered resistance remained in other parts of the village from German soldiers who had not yet surrendered. He could only spare 4 men to guard the prisoners. He instructed the guards to keep the prisoners contained and promised to send reinforcements when possible. Funk then returned to the ongoing fight, completely unaware of the catastrophic situation developing behind him. While Funk cleared the remaining resistance in Holtzheim, a German patrol approached the farmhouse. The patrol consisted of perhaps 10 to 20 men wearing white camouflage capes over their uniforms. In the snow and confusion of battle, they appeared almost identical to American troops in winter gear. The 4 guards failed to recognize the danger until far too late. The Germans overwhelmed the guards, disarmed them, and forced them to their knees before freeing the prisoners. 80 German soldiers plus the patrol that liberated them totaled 90 men. They quickly grabbed weapons from the confiscated pile and organized with military efficiency. They understood exactly their intended course of action: attack Company C from the rear. Funk's company remained scattered across the village, conducting mop-up operations against remaining resistance. They were not anticipating an attack from their rear position. If 90 Germans struck while American forces were dispersed, the result would be catastrophic. The German officer in charge, likely a lieutenant or captain, began issuing orders for positioning machine guns and establishing an ambush, waiting for his signal to attack. That was the moment when Leonard Funk walked around the corner of the farmhouse. Funk had come to check on the prisoners as a routine matter, wanting to ensure the guards were managing well and determine if reinforcements had arrived. He was not expecting to encounter 90 armed German soldiers. He rounded the corner and froze. The scene appeared surreal. His 4 guards were kneeling in the snow. The prisoners, who should have been disarmed and contained, were standing everywhere with rifles in their hands, organizing for battle. The German officer spotted Funk immediately. The first sergeant stripes on his sleeve marked him as a leader and a valuable prize. The officer strode forward aggressively and shoved his MP-40 submachine gun forcefully into Funk's stomach while screaming a command in German to surrender and drop his weapon. Funk did not speak German and had no comprehension of the officer's words. The officer screamed again with increased volume, his face reddening and veins bulging in his neck. Funk assessed his situation. 90 Germans surrounded him, half of them already armed. His 4 men were disarmed and helpless. 1 other American soldier stood beside him, equally powerless. The mathematical probability of survival was 0. No conceivable scenario existed where Leonard Funk could win this engagement. The sensible, rational decision was to surrender. However, Funk remembered Malmedy. 84 Americans murdered in a field, shot like animals, and left to freeze in the snow. He had already determined he would never surrender to German forces under any circumstances. Rather than complying with the German officer's demands, Leonard Funk did something completely inexplicable. He started laughing. The exact reason for Funk's laughter remains uncertain. Perhaps it was a deliberate tactical ruse designed to confuse the enemy and purchase precious time. Perhaps it was a stress response, as the human brain produces strange reactions when confronting certain death. Perhaps it was genuine amusement at the absurdity of the situation, an officer screaming in an incomprehensible language while expecting compliance. Funk himself later stated that he attempted to stop laughing but could not control himself. Something about the German screaming in his native language struck an inexplicable nerve. Whatever the underlying reason, the effect on the situation was devastating. The German officer screamed louder with increasing frustration. Funk laughed harder, bending over with shoulders shaking, calling out to his men that he could not understand what the officer was saying. Some of the German soldiers began laughing as well. The tension became bizarre. Their officer was turning purple with rage, while this American would not stop cackling. The officer was completely thrown off balance. Prisoners did not behave this way. They begged, they pleaded, they complied with orders. They did not stand laughing while a gun was shoved into their stomach. For several critical seconds, the German officer did not know how to respond to this unprecedented behavior. Leonard Funk utilized those precious seconds. While continuing to appear as though he was laughing, Funk slowly reached upward toward his Thompson submachine gun. It was slung over his shoulder in the standard carrying position for paratroopers. The German officer watched this movement. This appeared positive. The American was finally surrendering his weapon as ordered. Funk's hand closed around the grip of the Thompson. He began to unsling it, slowly and carefully. The German officer relaxed slightly, believing he was about to gain another prisoner and another trophy of war. Then Funk moved in one motion faster than conscious thought. He swung the Thompson downward, brought the muzzle into firing line, and squeezed the trigger. The M1A1 Thompson fired .45 ACP rounds at 600 rounds per minute. At close range, each round struck with the impact of a sledgehammer. The bullets did not merely wound, they destroyed tissue and bone catastrophically. The first burst caught the German officer directly in the chest, 30 rounds fired in less than 3 seconds. The officer was dead before his body struck the ground. Funk did not stop firing. He could not stop. The moment he began shooting, he committed himself to killing everyone threatening him or dying in the attempt. No middle ground existed. He pivoted while continuing to fire. The Thompson sprayed an arc of lead across the German soldiers nearest his position. Men screamed and fell. Blood sprayed across the white snow. Brass shell casings tumbled through the cold air, steaming on contact with the frozen ground. The magazine ran empty, 30 rounds expended in seconds. This represented the critical moment of the engagement. A Thompson submachine gun requires approximately 2 seconds to reload for a practiced operator. 2 seconds represents an eternity in close combat. 2 seconds provided sufficient time for 90 Germans to kill 1 American. Funk yanked the empty magazine out, slammed a fresh magazine into place, racked the bolt, and resumed shooting. The entire reload sequence occurred in less than a heartbeat through pure muscle memory. Thousands of hours of training compressed into one fluid motion. Simultaneously, he was screaming at his men to pick up the weapons the dead Germans had dropped. The 4 guards, still kneeling in the snow moments earlier as prisoners, scrambled for rifles. Seconds before, they were helpless captives. Now, they were fighting for their lives. The German soldiers descended into complete chaos. Their commanding officer was dead. The American, who had been laughing, was now killing them with devastating efficiency. Nobody had issued orders for this contingency. Nobody understood what action to take. Some Germans returned fire. Bullets cracked past Funk's head. 1 round killed the soldier standing beside him. Funk continued firing, moving, and killing without pause. His guards had acquired weapons and were now shooting as well. The Germans found themselves caught in a crossfire they had never anticipated. 60 seconds. That was the entirety of the engagement. 21 German soldiers lay dead in the blood-stained snow. 24 more suffered wounds. The remaining soldiers, more than 40 men, had thrown down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. The prisoners were prisoners once again. Leonard Funk stood in the middle of the carnage with smoke rising from his Thompson submachine gun, surrounded by bodies. He looked at his men and stated that what had just occurred was the stupidest thing he had ever witnessed. The aftermath proved almost anticlimactic. Company C secured Holtzheim completely. The captured Germans, the survivors of Funk's assault, were marched to the rear under substantially heavier guard this time. Funk reported the incident to his commanding officer as just another firefight, just another day in the war. However, the story spread rapidly through the regiment, through the division, and throughout the entire 82nd Airborne. The sergeant who laughed at 90 Germans and killed half of them with a Thompson gun became legendary. When the Medal of Honor recommendation reached Washington, nobody questioned its validity. What Funk accomplished at Holtzheim was beyond dispute. Outnumbered 90-1 with an enemy weapon pressed against his body, and instead of surrendering, he attacked. The official citation for the Medal of Honor reads that he was ordered to surrender by a German officer who pushed a machine pistol into his stomach. Although overwhelmingly outnumbered and facing almost certain death, First Sergeant Funk, pretending to comply with the order, began slowly to unsling his submachine gun from his shoulder, and then with lightning motion brought the muzzle into line and riddled the German officer. He turned upon the other Germans, firing and shouting to the other Americans to seize the enemy's weapons. On September 5, 1945, at the White House, President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around Leonard Funk's neck. President Truman stated that he would rather have this medal than be President of the United States. An accounting of what Leonard Funk earned during World War II is extraordinary. The Medal of Honor for Holtzheim, the Distinguished Service Cross for neutralizing the anti-aircraft guns in Holland, the Silver Star for leading 18 men through 40 miles of enemy territory in Normandy, the Bronze Star for meritorious service, 3 Purple Hearts for being wounded 3 separate times yet continuing to fight. Additionally, he received the Croix de Guerre from France, the Order of Leopold from Belgium, and the Military Order of William from the Netherlands, their equivalent of the Victoria Cross. Leonard Funk became the most decorated paratrooper of World War II. 5 feet 5 inches tall, 140 pounds, a former store clerk who became a legend.